Good afternoon, welcome. Thank you all for coming to this special event. Our book club has been going since lockdown, actually. It was a lockdown creation. And it's something we've become incredibly proud of. I think it's really unique. I think it's a unique opportunity once a month to share a book. But the author joins the book club meeting, and that's the unique element to it. I don't think there's any other bookshop doing something of this nature quite so regularly. And it's just a joy that we've been able to do this one, particularly with so many of you coming. And so what I would just encourage you to get on board. There's a lovely group of 20 or so subscribers, annual subscribers, who are mingled amongst you. And the next month book is Ross Montgomery's debut adult book. He's obviously a fantastic children's author, but so we're very excited about that. So I thought I'd give a little plug to that. I think it'll be carnage by the end, because you'll all be wanting to get signatures and stuff from Elizabeth, and she'll be going into in the foyer and doing her thing. So I thought I'd just do a little plug for the book club. Without further ado, can I welcome to the stage your host, Jamie Fewery, and Elizabeth Day.
I've caused lots of issues with the chair and my height, so I hope you can all hear me. I'm so sorry for being tall.
Welcome everyone to Tring Book Festival, and welcome to the book club. It's the biggest book club I've ever been in. We're really fortunate today to be joined by Elizabeth Day, who obviously everybody here knows as podcaster, novelist, writer, journalist, and today we're here to talk about her new book, One of Us, which I read a couple of months ago and really, really loved. It's a pickup from a previous novel called The Party, follows a complex friendship and the balance of power between two people, Martin and Ben, and the cast of characters that live around them. I've got some questions that I'm going to ask, but I'm very conscious this is your book club, so I want to leave at least half hour or so for you to pitch in your questions as you normally would do. Can I just have a show of hands of who has read this book so I don't drop any clanging spoilers straight away?
Wow!
Well, that's great, isn't it?
That's so cool.
So there's only a few that will... It's literally all clangers. We were just talking about the last line of the book before we came out. So, Elizabeth, I'm always fascinated when people write a sequel or pick up on something they've done before. Is the reason for this that the previous set of characters never left you alone? Did something new come to you? Was it always in the plan that this was going to be 2 books, potentially more? What was the kind of impetus to get this one going?
It was a mishmash of all of those, except actually when I wrote The Party, I didn't think that I would return to it. But my agent at the time gave me very good advice, and she was like, well, maybe you should leave it open just in case. And so I deliberately did leave it open. But I went away, and as you kindly mentioned in the introduction, I launched a podcast, I wrote some non-fiction books, I wrote other novels. And then it got to a stage, it was just after the pandemic, when my husband and I went away for a long weekend. And we went to a very nice hotel in Mallorca, but we got one of those early morning flights where when we got to the hotel, our room wasn't ready. So we ended up having a very nice, boozy lunch of paella and Whispering Angel. Not an ad, although it is the best rosé, in my opinion. And he was asking me, what are you going to write next? And I was thinking about it, and I did love my characters from The Party, and they had never really left me alone, particularly the character of Martin Gilmore, who is the primary protagonist and stands as the kind of quintessential outsider in both novels. And also, I was reflecting on how the political context had changed so dramatically. So, The Party was published in 2017, and now here we were, as it was then, it was sort of 6 years on from that. And it just astonished me how much had happened in a comparatively short period of time. We'd had the aftermath of Brexit, the rise of Trump, and the pandemic. And I had set The Party against a sort of David Cameron, Theresa May-esque backdrop. And I thought, well, things have changed so dramatically that I actually sort of want to see where they are now in terms of how the political backdrop has evolved. And the more I started thinking about it and talking about it with Justin, and the more I started drinking more rosé, the more I thought, oh, that's an idea that actually really intrigues me and excites me. And the great privilege of writing, let's call it a companion piece, because you don't have to have read The Party, although there are some Easter eggs in there if you have. But the great privilege is that you've already done the world building. So I already knew the world very well, and I knew the characters very well. And that allowed me to explore more around the themes and the plot, and to put them through things that I had never had the opportunity to explore before. So that was quite fun.
And I imagine the publisher was thrilled.
Yes.
Right now.
Yes, my UK publisher was thrilled, and actually my Dutch publisher was thrilled because The Party was a bestseller in the Netherlands. So, yeah.
Always good to please the Dutch.
Yeah.
Talk about that political context. One of the things I picked up on with the book is that there's an element of it's like a state of a nation. So something akin to like a Jonathan Coe or a Sue Townsend or something like that. When you're writing that kind of book, are you ever conscious of thinking this is a comment on what's happening now, but also I want it read in 5 years' time, so how am I reflecting it as almost a historical piece?
That's such a good question, and I love, first of all, thank you for calling it a State of the Nation book.
That's all right.
And I also love that you mentioned Jonathan Coe and Sue Townsend. But no, totally, for two reasons. I love them both as authors. Jonathan Coe, what a carve up, I think about all of the time. And Sue Townsend, again, because she was a funny woman, is often underrated in terms of the seriousness of what she was also writing, the serious points that she was making through her humour.
Yeah.
And not many women are afforded the compliment of being called State of the Nation novelists, because generally speaking, if we have that aspiration, many male reviewers will say, oh, this is a nice domestic drama about a sort of family life. I've had that kind of science before. So, but in answer to your actual question, I don't think when I'm writing a book that I allow myself to imagine how it might be received, categorised, or thought of in 5 years' time. Of course, I want to write something that is good, but really I want to write something that entertains and engages a reader and asks questions and asks the reader on the other side of the page to engage in a conversation about the things I'm talking about and writing about. But beyond that, I try and write in quite a sort of protected space where I'm not freaking myself out by imagining how it might or might not be responded to. Having said that, I definitely wanted to look at the times that we are living through right now, because I do think that they are extremely challenging and dark and painful, and they are also absurd. And one of the ways in which we look at absurdity as writers and artists is through the lens of comedy. And I've said before that this is actually the most fun I've had writing a book, because I was so aware that there were so many things I got the opportunity to skewer, hopefully with some accuracy. And I was very inspired by something that Margaret Atwood said to me, actually, name drop. She came on my podcast, How to Fail, and she was talking about writing The Handmaid's Tale. And as you all know, The Handmaid's Tale is this dystopian, futuristic novel about the state of women in particular. And she said to me that although it was fiction, she didn't write anything that hadn't already happened in the world or wasn't already happening in the world around her. And I thought that that was so powerful, because often with fiction, you make an unpalatable truth palatable, you make it accessible, and you ask people to ask questions of it. So I tried to do that in One of Us as well, that everything in this book, I think, has happened or is happening.
I think the fun comes through, because there is an element of absurdity to so many of the characters. But talking about that, there are tropes, or not tropes, I suppose, characteristics of the people you're writing about, Richard Tate, for example, Ben, that feel like you could pick them up and put them in the House of Commons and they would not look out of place.
Yes.
Are you... I asked a similar question to Mick Herron, because in his book you can really be like, that's Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Do do you try and separate the two? Do you borrow little bits from here and there, or is anyone a proper caricature? Not that you're going to say who it is, but
No, I get. No one is a full-on caricature, but I definitely take bits and pieces from real life. And I think that comes from my training as a journalist, actually, because I spent the best part of 20 years as a print journalist. And as a print journalist, you get this very privileged position of being invited into rooms that you don't necessarily belong in, but you get to observe. And so I was busy observing a lot of what was happening, and a lot of the characters that I was meeting, and some of whom I was interviewing. So a character like Richard Take, and it's so nice not having to explain the plot of the book because so many of you have read it, but for those few who haven't, Richard Take is a Tory MP who has lost his front bench seat because of an indiscretion where he was watching porn on his work computer. Now, on one level that's funny, on another level that has happened. We saw Neil Parish in the Houses of Parliament watching what he said was tractor porn on his smartphone whilst the session was seated. And we've had Matt Hancock obviously being caught on CCTV in a romantic clinch at the height of COVID. So I definitely took real life inspiration, if you can call it inspiration, from what happened. And then I also, his character arc, to begin with actually, when I was writing Richard Take, I was writing him as a satirical character. But the more that I got to know him, the more I empathised with him. And so he ends up going on a sort of redemptive arc in many respects, where he turns out to be more decent than one might imagine. And part of his rehabilitation in the public eye involves him going on a reality TV show and going on various podcasts. That also was inspired by real life events. And I do think that reality TV is one of the great cultural forces of our age, for good and for bad. I would say for good because I'm a huge fan. But we live in a society where you do get people like Matt Hancock or Anne Widdecombe going on reality TV shows to humanise themselves. And we live in a world where President Trump has been elected twice President of the United States. And I think part of the reason that has happened is because the electorate became so familiar with him on primetime TV at the helm of The Apprentice that they began to see what I might posit are his sort of dangerous, unhinged attributes as sort of lovable eccentricities that one might expect from a crazy uncle at a family wedding. And so actually, reality TV does shape a lot of how we see people. So I also wanted to look at that.
One of the interesting things about these characters in there, I think with the exception of maybe one, and it kind of corresponds to what you were saying about you give them a redemption arc, that this book doesn't tell people what to think about these people, with the exception of one character who's obviously a complete
Villain,
Yeah,
yes.
villain. Everyone else is deeply flawed in their own way. But is it a conscious decision to let the reader kind of make up their own mind? You present the fact almost journalistically, you present the facts as to what these people do, this is who they are, this is what they've done. The emotional heart of the book, which is, say, Martin is deeply flawed in himself. There's no judgment on the page, really, apart from one guy. Is that, again, a deliberate thing that you don't want to kind of, this is what to think about this?
Oh, I so appreciate you said that. Yes, I think it is a conscious thing. It's not so much about trying to make the reader feel anything. I want you to feel something. It's not that I want you to feel a specific thing, that's what I'm saying. It's more that I think that is human nature, that I don't think there is any such thing as an unlikable character. As you say, potentially with the exception of one character in this book, who is Andrew Jarvis.
Yes.
Having said that, we only know Andrew Jarvis from the perception of all of the other characters in the book. So we also don't know necessarily what he's been through, and maybe if I wrote a separate novel about him, which I don't want to do, but if I did, I would probably find something to feel sympathy or empathy towards. So it's more that I feel one of my jobs as a novelist is to explain why certain people act in the ways that they might, which we might find superficially unlikable, or dangerous, or sad, or mean-spirited. But ultimately, it all comes from something that they've experienced or something that they're grappling with or some damage that they've had to survive. So you mentioned Martin Gilmore there, and Martin, for me, in the party, he was somewhat sociopathic, but he also had this tortured need to belong. And he had a very difficult upbringing. His father died before he was born. His mother was slightly sinister, and he ended up getting a scholarship to a private boarding school where he becomes fixated on the aristocratic ease of his wealthy best friend, Ben Fitzmaurice. And he becomes so desperate for Ben to love him back in the way that he loves Ben, that it leads him into making lots of very, very bad decisions. And that, for me, elicits empathy as well as anything else. And really, in One of Us, I wanted to give Martin hope. And I wanted to show how this is someone who's struggled not only with his sense of belonging, but his own sexual identity. He denies the truth of himself to himself. And I wanted to look at how someone like that might actually benefit from the times that we now live in, even though Martin will dismiss it as sort of hyper-wokery and sort of stuff and nonsense. Actually, the fact that we now do live in more gender-fluid times that are more accepting also enables him to explore the side of himself that he's felt wrongly, deeply ashamed of for so many years.
There's a few characters on there in the book who, to the point you just made there about the point they're making in these decisions, some of them are desperate, they're reacting to extreme circumstances. So you're constantly putting characters in these circumstances, like, what are you going to do now? You've almost got nowhere else to turn. Like that going on the reality TV show for Richard Tate.
Yeah.
There's a constant thing in both books, say the party and this one, that particularly with how the party ends, that people are put in desperate situations and made to react in some way, which I think makes them interesting as artifacts. Going on to the relationship between the two, Martin and Ben specifically. So the book is almost at its core about friendship and what power does to friendship. And you've written about friendship before. Do you think there's anything specific about male friendship and the way that men are friends that is distinct from anything else? About how, whether it's this much publicised thing that men are never quite honest with each other about how they're feeling about something. There's always weird dynamics and power imbalances that are informing those friendships.
Well, I'm very aware, sitting here as a white middle-class woman, that I'm not the expert on this. So I would love to hear your opinion after I've given mine, my very unexpert one. But you're right, I did write a non-fiction book about friendship called Friendaholic. And the reason I wrote it was because, for me, friends have been the most consistent, greatest love of my life. And I feel that doesn't get enough airplay, really, that we've spent so many centuries at the sort of worshipping at the altar of romantic love that we've forgotten to give platonic love its own vocabulary. That's issue number one, is that we don't often have the language to express the uniqueness of this kind of love that we feel for our friends. That applies for friendships of any gender. But I do think that there is something specifically with male straight friendships where that is even more highlighted, where it's even more difficult to reach for the language of love, because, especially if you're a man of a certain generation, because you're worried that might be misinterpreted in some way, but also potentially because you've been socially conditioned to come across in a certain macho vein, which is, oh, I don't really need anyone else, I'm self-sufficient and I'm really strong. And of course, strength is not the opposite of vulnerability. It is one of the many facets of it. And so there's a lot of sort of deconditioning, I think, that needs to be done. And then the other thing that happens from my research in Friendaholic and from speaking to men I know, including our mutual friend Satnam, the other thing that happens, particularly with straight men, is that their friendships tend to be friendships of circumstance. So geographical closeness, knowing each other from school, knowing each other from the workplace. And then if you get married and you have children, and you're still in a full-time job, your time becomes ever more limited, and you tend to hemorrhage friendships. Whereas women, generally speaking, and I'm very aware that this is a huge generalisation, are better at those sort of small day-to-day interactions, whether it be at the school gates, at their work. They're better at sort of just keeping up the conversation, whereas men struggle to do that. And there's an entire movement called the Men Shed movement in this country. It started in Australia, but that's devoted to helping men stay friends. And the person who founded it, Ray Winder, realised that actually this shared interest is very important. So the Men Shed movement is all about having a shed or a hall like this one somewhere in the local community where men can come once a week and do a shared activity, whether it's knitting pink kittens, baking cakes, or watching football, and that's how friendship blooms. And so with Martin and Ben, there's an added complexity to their friendship because it's very one-sided for so many years. Martin's much more invested in it, and Martin's invested in it not just from pure reasons. He's also invested in it because he thinks it reflects well on him to be friends with Ben Fitzmaurice. And there's then another layer of complexity, which is that Martin actually is secretly in love with Ben, but can't admit that to Ben, let alone to himself. And so One of Us takes place sort of several years on from the events of the party. And Martin and Ben haven't spoken during that time because they had a massive falling out. And Martin's love has calcified into revenge. And actually, if you think about it, they're quite similar, those two emotions, love and revenge, because they both require an enormous amount of obsessive focus and feeling. And so Martin now thinks, well, I'm hell-bent on revenge and I want to bring Ben down and he's on course to become the next Tory Prime Minister. How can I stop it? And he gets invited back into the Fitzmaurice family fold. And then he realises that actually there's all of this unresolved love still there, and that neither Ben nor Martin, for different reasons, can ever be truly honest about it until the end of the book.
I think, yeah, it's one of the things I was thinking about when you were just talking there is how even while he's on a revenge mission, many of Martin's acts are not explicitly vengeful. He's still trying to be one of us. He's still trying to be in the inner circle, and even when it comes to the very end, he's almost content with where he's ended up. Within that, do you think, when you got to the end of it, did you think, I'm closed on these characters now? Do you feel it feels like there's more to say, potentially?
So with this one, I explicitly felt, I think I want to revisit these characters.
Okay, yeah.
And I love groupings of three. I love trilogies, and so...
So if anyone had that question...
Yes, I do think I will write a final instalment, not immediately, because I enjoyed being able to let them simmer, and also I think 8 to 10 years is quite a nice chunk of time for the world to spin again on its axis and for different things to have happened and for the characters to have percolated and matured in my head. So not immediately, but yes.
And on the current trajectory of politics, things should be really good.
Let's hope so. I know. Let's hope so. We'll all be singing Kumbaya and admiring the autumn leaves.
Everyone will be friends again. I can't imagine it being.
Yeah.
Within that, the party was such a successful book, and as you said, after the party, there was the podcast and the other books, and it was almost a bit of a breakthrough moment, I'd say. It really changed things for you. Did you ever feel that when you started to sit down, so you'd had that conversation, you'd had the Whispering Angel, you'd had the paella, and you sat down and you were like, right, I am going back into this.
Yes.
Did you ever feel a sense of risk of, I'm reopening?
Yes, that is such a good question. I felt really nervous and a little intimidated. But I think that's the thing about instinct, is that you just keep on pushing through those feelings because you feel that there's the nugget of something there. But I did have to go back and reread the party. And I don't know if anyone here has had that experience of sort of, I don't know, like seeing an old exam paper that you've written. And for some reason, for revision purposes, you have to go back and read it again. And it feels so embarrassing even to sort of veer close to it. You have to like really build yourself up. And then once you read it, you're like, oh, I didn't know that I knew that stuff about photosynthesis. Well done me. But that was my experience of rereading the party. I was dreading it. I was dreading rereading it and thinking, oh gosh, all of those terrible sentences I wrote and those words I repeated and the errors I made that I wouldn't make now. And actually, having dreaded it so much, when I went back and reread it, I was like, it's pretty good. It's not perfect, there's stuff I'd change, but it's actually okay. But it was so interesting rereading it because I'd forgotten loads of stuff. Yeah. And I'm the kind of reader, I don't know whether Book Club can relate, I read a book and I will really remember forever and ever how much I loved that book. But almost immediately I'll forget everything about it. I'll forget the characters' names, I'll forget the plots. I'll just remember that I loved it, and I might remember like a sentence or a metaphor from it. And it was like that with my own book, actually. And so I had to, as I was reading it, note down specific characteristics. I'd forgotten that I'd given Martin sort of facial twitches and things like that, ages, dates, all of that. And so I was prepared then when it came to writing One of Us. And it was actually, the anticipation was worse than the starting of it. Once I started, and I started with Martin because I feel I know Martin so well, and like all of my characters, apart from Jarvis, Martin is an aspect of me. And his voice just came back to me, and it was loud and clear, and I just knew it. And I knew where he was and what he was feeling. And it was a real joy to be back in his kind of acerbic observation. And then it was fine. And also, the other joy of writing the sequel was that I introduced, Richard Take is an entirely new character, but the other voices that you hear from, because it's a multi-voice narrative, are Serena, Ben's wife, and Cosima, Ben and Serena's eldest daughter, and Fliss, Ben's older sister. And they had all appeared in the party, but Cosima was a non-speaking part. Fliss was only ever seen through other people's eyes. And Serena she acted in really unlikable ways. And actually to have the chance to bring those characters to the foreground and to explore them with much more nuance was a really wonderful process for me, particularly with the character of Serena, actually.
And in the writing of it, because both books are driven by kind of Martin's arc, Martin's relationship, but you give equity to these other characters. You're very conscious of doing that. You kind of, is it colour-coded or something like that? Do you make, or is there a governing kind of arc of the story that belongs to one person? How does that work? Because it is these different perspectives on the same thing.
It's not colour-coded. I have no post-it notes. Actually, the way that I work is that I tend not to overplan, because I am the kind of writer that is very driven by character. So I need to get into a character's voice and into their head to understand how they will then act. But with One of Us, I always knew that I wanted it to be multi-voice, and I knew it was going to be a rotating chapter device, because I really like writing like that. And I also find books that are written like that very satisfying to read. So Maeve Binchy is a classic proponent, does it so brilliantly. Robert Altman films, again, I love the way that he intersperses stories that you don't think are connected, and then you realise that they are. A previous novel of mine, Paradise City, was written in that way as well, and I really like it as a form, partly because one of the things that fascinates me is that people have different truths and different beliefs about something that's happened, and I love being able to explore the kaleidoscope of that, because that is human nature. So I did spend a lot of time thinking about it, and there's a little tribute to where I was when I was thinking about it in this book. So one of the slightly absurd things that has happened as a result of the popularity of the podcast is that I occasionally get offered free trips to wellness retreats, which is an incredibly lovely perk. But for whatever reason, I get invited to very sort of strict, disciplined wellness retreats. There's no champneys, there's no fluffy champneys robe. And I got invited to an Austrian clinic, and it was called the original FX Meyer. I don't know, some of you might know it, and it's run along these principles. This physician called FX Meyer. It's basically fasting, and you're encouraged to chew your food at least 15 times. And it's sort of very bland, minimal diet, and no talking during meals, no looking at your phone, no reading. And actually, I kind of loved it because the landscape was so stunning. So I was sitting in this dining room overlooking this lake and the sort of trees on the other side of the lake and these mists wreathing through the leaves. And because I couldn't talk or read or look at my phone, I just started thinking about the plot of One of Us. And I plotted it all out every single mealtime at the original FX Meyer clinic in Austria. And then I would rush back to my room and I would write down notes. So when we first meet Serena, she is in that dining room chewing her food, looking at the lake, and she's contemplating her life and how she feels that she's losing her worth because she feels wrongly that she's losing her beauty. And so I sort of thought it all through mentally. But then when it came to writing it, I stuck to that mostly. But for instance, the ending isn't the ending that I anticipated because the characters were doing slightly different things.
It's interesting. And people pay to go to these clinics. So
people pay to eat very little. Actually, to be fair, you don't feel that hungry. And I have been back because I did find that I really liked it.
Are you going back again for the next book? Just
Maybe.
This is where I've got to go
to be fair, this last year I had 3 wellness retreats and it was way too much. I was like, why am I doing this to myself? I'd rather just go on holiday, because part of what I love about holiday is cocktails and like lengthy dinners. So.
I love the idea that the book was conceived when you were thinking Whisper an Angel and Paella, and then plotted when you weren't allowed to eat.
Yes, that's so funny, isn't it? And where was I when I was in Berlin when I finished the first draft? And it was this time last year, actually, I went to visit a really good friend of mine who lives in Berlin, and we were eating like bratwurst and like heavy Germanic food.
So yeah, there's a moment of inspiration which is fun, the penitence of actually doing it, and then the fun at the end again.
Exactly.
Which is quite an apt thing for writing a novel, isn't it?
Although hilariously, Jamie, when I booked the hotel that I was going to stay in Berlin, because it looked beautiful and airy, and I was like, yes, that looks great. It was like a design hotel. And I booked the one room in that hotel that had a bath, because along with reality TV and cats, baths are like my third obsession. And when I got to the hotel, they revealed that it had been a prison. So it had been a prison, and actually female resistance fighters were imprisoned there during the Second World War, and they have original cell doors still on the hotel rooms. But the hotel room that I had booked, the one with the bath, was actually the former chapel, and that had the original door saying chapel in German. I was like, oh my gosh, what an appropriate place to be imprisoned to like finish my book until it's done.
And now here you are in a church talking about it.
There we are.
The circularity
It's all
of
connected.
this is unbelievable. So we're just about half an hour in, so as promised, who's got the first question for the book?
No pressure.
I'm sure there's going to be loads, but it always takes one person to go first.
There's one enthusiastic one making notes. I'm expecting a good question from you.
Unfortunately for you, Ben, it's right at the other end of the room from where you're standing.
Well spotted.
Thank you. It was a great discussion. You said just then you imagined a different ending for the book, and I'm just interested to see what you imagined versus what you actually wrote.
Sorry, what was the first bit of the question?
Which is, it was a great discussion, and you said you imagined a different ending to the book when you set out to write it. So it's just interesting how it varied in the final version.
Thank you. I wasn't just making you repeat the compliment, although that was very nice. Thank you. Thank you. How did I feel bad because I feel... You don't mind if I spoil the ending, the people who haven't read it? Okay, fine. Thank you. So how did I think it was going to end? I wasn't sure whether... So Richard Take ends up being Prime Minister. But I wasn't sure if I was going to give him that. And I wasn't sure if actually Ben Fitzmaurice would end up being Prime Minister. Because I think initially is what I was thinking. Because then I was like, oh, well, that's a depressing verdict on the state of the nation, the state of the world as it is today. And then the more that I wrote, the more that I was like, actually, I'd just rather end with just a sliver here and there of hope. And I also hadn't anticipated Richard Take going on the narrative arc that he goes on, where, as I was saying earlier, he gets more decent. And that's partly because of Hannah, his now ex-wife. But for me, Hannah, again, I hadn't thought of her as a character when I sat down to write, and she just emerged on the page, and I just love her so much. And she is this sort of thrumming heart of moral decency, the kind of backbone of the Britain that we all know and love. And I think her impact on Richard I had also underestimated. So those were the things that I was sort of playing with. And then also the first draft, I let Ben off too easily. So Cosima, as you know, ends up in Bali, saving the world. And Ben writes her an email basically saying, sorry about all of that, and she forgives him. And my agents rightly pointed out that that wasn't very satisfying, and that a reader would probably be incensed that I'd put them through all of this only to be giving him a very sort of easy let-off. And so both he and Serena had to do more work as parents in order to earn how Cosima then is forgiving towards them. And Serena, she became so much deeper with the redrafting of the novel. So I examined much more how she felt as a parent, and how, because of the social background that she comes from, she just packed her children off to nannies and boarding school as soon as she was able. But then the pandemic had given her this experience of being with her children again, and how she actually loved that, and she doesn't know if she's allowed to, but she's feeling this yearning to be closer to them. So she actually makes great strides in terms of trying to understand Cosima. So I think in the original ending, Ben and Serena were still quite mean and unevolved. And this ending, I hope, leaves us with just a bit more hope that people can change and improve. Okay.
Is Hannah the kind of character you might explore again in future? Because she is quite under the radar, but has a lot going on there.
Yeah, and she's one of those, it's one of those rare things that happens sometimes, you will know this as a novelist, where this character just emerged completely fully formed. I was like, I know exactly who Hannah is, I know what clothes she'd wear, and I know what jokes she'd make, and she was just great. So I really liked being in her company as well.
Which is not something you can say for all of the characters in
No. But it was important to me that there was this sort of drumbeat of decency in the midst of all of this toxicity and corruption, that we had characters like Cosima, who, she's a teenager, so she definitely has a passionate belief in her own ideals, and she also believes she's the first person ever to have felt them. But she is there saying, the world is burning and no one is listening, and you're just dismissing me as a silly teenager, but I'm the only person who is willing to say this in my family, and that was important. And as was Fliss. I mean, Fliss, who is such a tragic character because she's so often the scapegoat for everyone else's awfulness. And I wanted both Fliss and Cosima to be there, sort of representing the heart of the book.
Next question.
There's one from Ed here.
Hi.
Thank you. I wanted to return to you watching reality TV with your cat in the bath.
Thank you so much. Finally.
Because it seems there's a paradox for me here. You said that reality TV does shape the way we see people, but in order to do that, it has to flatten people. And you spend your writing unshaping people, exploring nuance, exploding tropes. So why do you still enjoy reality TV?
Wow, what a phenomenal question. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just say, whenever I dry up every month, or if I do, I can rely on Ed. I could just turn to Ed and say, right, Ed, you got a question, and I'm always putting him on the spot.
That's an amazing
And he always
question.
knocks it out the park.
And thank you for the compliment inherent in the question, which is that I write rounded characters. It depends which kind of reality TV you're talking about. So there's certain elements of reality TV and elements of TV or cinema or art more generally that do flatten and do make, and social media, that do make characters seem very sort of two-dimensional, and their image is often very controlled either by them or the TV producer, and we're sort of fed a certain narrative. There are other kinds of reality TV that I would argue actually do a very good job of showing a character, a person in their full complexity, which isn't always likable and sometimes is eccentric and unhinged. And for me, the Real Housewives franchise, for instance, falls into that latter category, where over seasons, over many, many hours of television, it's actually quite Dickensian, the subplots, the attention paid to minor characteristics, because we get to know these women over the course of several years sometimes. And it's vanishingly rare still to see those kind of characters, that age group of women. They're sort of often 50 plus, they're often sort of widows, or they're divorced and they're going through menopause and they're dealing with grown-up children. It's very rare to see that on scripted drama, those groups of women interacting. So actually, I've got a lot of inspiration as a writer of character from The Real Housewives. And I know that sounds absurd, but it's also true. It really is true. And one of the things that it's taught me is that sometimes people are wildly unpredictable. And sometimes to make your writing more convincing, you also have to reflect that. So it's not actually about developing a character arc that goes from A to B to C all the way to Z, that sometimes you have to make your characters do surprising things for them to be more realistic in an odd sort of way. So I think that kind of reality TV actually helps me. But the other kind of reality TV does flatten and also has that dangerous rehabilitative quality where people who have done kind of bad things often are beamed into our living rooms and are being given sort of high scores for a cha-cha-cha. And we suddenly sort of forget actually all of the other stuff that is also part of them and part of their character. But that's a great question. I haven't been asked it before, and I'm going to keep thinking about it with my cat in the bath. The cat isn't in the bath with me. He would hate that, but he's just beside.
You must get that on the podcast as well, about people that come on and they try and present, this is the reality I wish to present, and then it's your job to kind of...
Definitely, to unpick that. Yeah, if I can. But most of the time I think I can, and most of the time the people who come on the podcast are so willing to do that. But when Boris Johnson quit and when Liz Truss quit, I got asked a lot, when are you getting them on the podcast? And my answer was probably never, because I don't believe, and I might be wrong, but I don't believe at that stage either of them were willing to have the degree of self-awareness that they would require to admit that they had failed. And so that's something that I look for in a guest, is someone who is sort of willing to open up about it.
They're both still struggling with that reality, aren't they?
Maybe, yes. I have actually interviewed Boris Johnson before, but for a newspaper. He did, anyway, that's another story.
Hello. One of the voices that I was hoping to hear from after everything came out about Andrew Jarvis was Serena, and I felt like maybe we didn't hear so much of how she felt about everything after everything came out about him and Fliss.
Yes.
And I wondered if that was intentional not to explore her response to that.
That's another great question. And it was partly intentional, and it was also probably partly because the truth of what Andrew Jarvis did became more noticeable in the second draft. So maybe that's an error I made, that I didn't sort of seed it through properly. But I think with Serena, she's in denial over it. And Serena interests me for a number of reasons. And one of them is that she is a woman of my generation, my age. She's the first sort of perimenopausal character I've written while I was going through it. And she also came of age in the 90s, when there were so many mixed and complex messages about a woman's right to consent, about a woman's body, about who was in control of all of those things, about one's need to please powerful men in one's life. She's grown up with this kind of conditioning. And so I think for Serena, she cannot admit to herself that what Jarvis did was what I would define, and many readers would define, as rape, as sexual assault. She can't live with that truth and live with the truth that she didn't help Fliss when Fliss was experiencing similar. So I think she's just in abject denial about it, because she is still a very imperfect woman. And part of the reason she's able to go back to Ben and to preserve the life that she has is because of that denial. So I think that for her to lean into exploring it more would just undermine so much of what she has, and she's not willing to do that yet. Thank you.
Who's next?
Love this conversation. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Elizabeth. I've just finished the book today. I was one of those last-minute readers who was like desperate to read it before, so everything is very fresh in my mind. How do you get so much social and cultural commentary within a book? So many one-liners that I remember, like when Serena sits down for the drink with Andrew and he brings her the champagne, and that piece around kind of wanting to order on her own, but also being really quite flattered to have something brought to her. The piece around Britain has never been so racist or allowed to be so racist since Brexit. There are so many like one-liners that you have in it that are so poignant. And I think many people feel, a particular generation, do you keep a book? How do you make sure it's the right quantity, that it really fits the narrative? How do you balance that as an author?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for saying that, and thank you for reading the book so closely and for finishing it today. So unlike me, you'll be able to remember everything about it. Brilliant. Brilliant. So that's great. Gosh, I'm so flattered by that. I don't keep a book. Actually, I'm a terrible author in that respect because I feel that I should be constantly noting things down in a little moleskin, but I don't do that. I've only just recently started keeping a diary, and it was partly because my very good friend Dolly Alderton said, you should start keeping a diary because one day that'll be your pension. I was like, actually, that's very, very, very good advice. So I don't note things physically as I go, but I do remember things and note things mentally. And I suppose that's one of the things that the podcast has taught me is the art of listening. That so often when I'm interviewing someone, I'm listening to the thing that they're telling me, but I'm also listening to the story that hasn't been told. And I think that probably that just makes me more alert to moments like that. And I have a lot of my own thoughts and a lot of my own anger and a lot of my own jokes that I also want to explore, but that in my public-facing life, I can't really, and in my non-fiction, I can't really, whereas fiction feels so much more creatively liberating in certain respects, in that I can throw it all in there through the lens of character. So it's not me, it's like the author speaking through the characters. And there were just a lot of things that I wanted to say, but there were also things that I didn't realise I wanted to say that came up as I was writing it. And actually, it's one of the things I've been reflecting on lately, is how often in my novels, there's a lot of rage around the treatment of women. And that shouldn't be surprising. But in a way, I was like, oh, I hadn't noticed I was doing that. I didn't set out to do it, but it just comes up again and again. And the reason it comes up again and again is because it still happens again and again in society. And so I want to be a mirror to that. Thank you.
Hi, Elizabeth. My question is more around your research and your own friendships as well. And so you talk about the trauma responses of your characters and they behave in the way they do because of the trauma that they've been through. Did any of your friends read a draft of the book at all? Specifically, I'm talking about Emma. So, and did you rely on any of your friendship with Emma and her background in psychotherapy to, I guess, make sure those trauma responses were, or do they all come from your sense of who the characters are?
Wow, I have to say, the Tring Book Club, these questions are a whole other level. Thank you. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Emma is my best friend. She's also a therapist, which is an amazing combination to having a best friend. She actually didn't read a draft. She read a proof copy as soon as I had one. But Emma always likes to read it when it's done, because she likes to have the full experience, and I really value her response. Weirdly, I think they just come from me. But I think, in all seriousness, I have the hugest of admiration for therapists in particular. I have been so blessed with amazing, all women actually, in my life who have given me therapy over the years. I still see someone every 2 weeks who is incredibly helpful and illuminating. My father's a retired surgeon, so he's been very useful. My previous novel, Magpie, there was a specific character who needed a specific prescription. I was like, if a character's acting like this and has it, what drugs would they be on? And so he's very useful in that respect. But because of the nature of what I do, which is really being curious about human nature, and because I've had a fair amount of therapy myself, and because of Emma's influence on me, and we talk about these things all the time, most of it was a natural response to what I felt my character was going through and how I feel that trauma response would show up. But I did do a fair amount of research around a few things, one of which was climate change activism, because that's not something that I know enough about, to my own shame. And I was very inspired by the story of a young climate change activist called Cressida. And she was one of the M25 protesters, and she was 17 when she took part in the protest, and then a first-year student at Cambridge when she actually got imprisoned for it. And if you look at YouTube videos of Cressida, she just so fundamentally believes in what she's doing. There's something incredibly beautiful about the way that she speaks, that sort of purity, and it's sort of what's lacking in so much of the world today. And so I did a lot of research around her specifically, but also like what happens at a protest and how they de-escalate the situation. That was fascinating. I didn't know any of that before. So I did a lot of research around that. And then I'm trying to think if there was Austrian fasting clinics. That was tax deductible now, so that's good. And Bali, yes, I went on a holiday to Bali, and so I was like taking notes all the way through that, and how someone would go to Bali and what kind of climate change work they do there. So stuff like that, I did research.
Was there a question down the back? I saw someone's hand up a minute ago. I did.
Well done, those glasses are
No,
working.
yes.
Yeah.
They're completely fake.
Are they? You're like Martin. He used to wear
He
fake
wears
glasses.
fake glasses,
Yes.
doesn't he? No, these are real.
Hi, Elizabeth. So I love your writing, but also your podcast.
Thank you.
So I'm very interested to know if you could have one of the characters from the book on How to Fail, who would it be?
Oh my God, such a good question. Oh, who would I? I mean, I think it would have to be Martin. I just want to meet Martin. I also think Martin, he's very clever and he's very funny. If he feels safe, he'd like actually crack a good few jokes. And I think I'd have him on because he's got so much to say if you ask the right questions. And part of what I really enjoyed exploring was the unlikely friendship between him and Cosima. And that's another way that friendship shows up in one of us, that actually you see so much more of Martin's humanity because of how he is with Cosima. So I feel like he'd be a tough nut to crack, but once I'd cracked him, there'd be all of this hidden treasure underneath.
Would you have Richard take? If you said no to Boris, no to Truss.
I know, where am I going to draw the line?
Where's the line?
Well, because Richard Tate has been on a journey.
He has.
We actually don't really know what kind of Prime Minister he is by the end of the book, which was deliberate. But I would have him on. I think he'd fall into the Keir Starmer category for me now, where I still would have them on, unless they become a Liz Truss or a Boris Johnson.
Okay.
So at the moment, I would. I've had some great politicians. I had Ed Miliband on, and he was amazing because he genuinely engaged with the premise that he had genuine failures.
When I read the book, I always got the sense that Richard Tate might not be Prime Minister for all that long.
I can neither confirm or deny because I don't know yet. I need to get another bottle of Whispering Angel and then I'll be able to tell you.
It felt like there might be a year and then a leadership challenge and then it might all go a bit wrong for him.
Yes, we don't know. I just have to say on the Whispering Angel front, I mentioned them in the acknowledgements, genuinely, and then in this beautiful and absurd twist of fate, they ended up sponsoring my book launch. So there's a top tip for any wannabe authors. Acknowledge any brand that you like in your book,
Okay.
and then hopefully you'll get some free stuff.
I'll go for like Rolex next time.
Yeah. Super yachts. Yeah.
One down there.
Hello.
Hello.
I was really struck by Cosima's character.
Thank you.
And one of the chapters towards the end of the book, she's in Bali, she's kind of reflecting on, do I actually care about the environmental activism, or did I just want revenge on my father?
Yeah.
And there's a page where she goes through all her memories of like the beauty of her family and the things that she actually really loved about her father. And there was a moment that really struck me that I actually have the page open. But she's saying, I didn't mean to, she wanted to say, I didn't think, I just wanted him to notice me. And that was for me, I don't know if anyone else was struck by that moment. I kind of looked back and went, oh my gosh. Because the only first person account is Martin's, and that almost felt like a little bit of a first person moment for Cosima. So I just wondered if that was intentional or if that was my own experience of reading your lovely novel.
First of all, I could listen to you say anything. You have the most beautiful voice.
Thank you. I actually got really insecure about saying Cosima because I'm Canadian, so in my mind it's very different than how you all say it.
I was like, why do I not pronounce Cosima like that? It's great, all of my books from now on. Again, what a beautiful question. It was intentional. I love that you noticed that it slipped into first person. And I suppose, again, there's a bit of me in there as well. I think, if I'm being really honest, I spent so much of my life trying to make my father proud of me. And in a way, that's been great because it's given me so much motivation and drive to do ever better things. But in another way, it's sad because ultimately, love is not about what you do, it's about who you are. And I think Cosima is grappling with all of that. And, you know, I'm 46, but she's only 17. So she's further along the path than I was at that stage, but there's still so much about her identity that is unformed and uncertain. And a bit like Martin, actually, she has forged so much of her character around the shape of Ben, in opposition to, in order to get his attention, and Martin's done the same thing. And I think maybe it's something that quite a few of us struggle with, sort of understanding where we start and where our parental or familial influence stops. And so, yeah, she's sort of grappling with all of that. And I wanted to leave it slightly uncertain as to which side she'd fall on, because it would be so sad if she gave up the environmental activism, because it does actually count and it is actually meaningful, because she feels like that will make her more lovable. But I have hope for her. I have hope. Thank you.
Hello. Shout out for Cheddington Book Group. We're not part of Tring's book group, but we've been going for years. I was also one of the people that finished the book, actually, today. And what you just said then I really related to as well with Cosima. I really felt for her. And what I thought was really fascinating was the difference in how she felt about basically throwing her father under the bus versus how Martin felt, because he was like, oh, yeah, great, come on. But then when Martin and Ben then had their conversation and Ben's kind of saying to him, you've been such a great friend to me all this time and everything. And I guess what I kind of wondered, I wonder if Ben actually finds out or did find out that his daughter and his best friend had done this to him, would he forgive them? Or would he say, actually, you've done me a big favour because I wasn't particularly a very nice person before all this. I was so focused on wanting to be the Prime Minister. So just a thought.
What's your name?
Leslie.
Leslie, well, thank you, Leslie, for finishing the book today. And Leslie, that is the fundamental question, so eloquently put, that I will want to explore in the next book. Because I think Ben does find out. And that's why it's chilling that Jarvis walks across the pool towards Martin, because Jarvis is the one who knows that it wasn't him who did it, so it must have been Martin. And I don't know, it's an interesting one. Will Martin protect Cosima, or he'll have to explain how he came by the files? But Cosima did it, and the reason she feels conflicted when she sees Richard take on TV and it all coming to fruition is because, like a classic teenager, she hasn't thought through and can't think through the consequence of her actions because she's not old enough to have that experience yet, whereas Martin is so much more aware. He knows so much more, and he's so much more twisted and so much more vengeful. As much as I love him, he is also all of those things. So I think Ben will find out, and that will be the next book. And I don't think that he has... I love the Leslie take that he might have this better nature of like, well, thank you for showing me the right path, but I don't think he will. I think he'll be clouded by his male rage.
My reading of it is he's not a very reflective man, potentially.
No, not yet. Will he get rid of... I don't know. You see, these are all exciting things that I get to think about the next time I'm chewing on a buckwheat cracker.
I've got time for one more? One more question.
Oh. Definitely.
I think they can work independently.
So they can work totally independently, yeah. And I'm really glad that you hadn't read the party and that you still enjoyed it. So, thank you.
One more question. Claire.
Oh, please don't set me up for failure. Hi, Elizabeth. I listened to the audio and I thought it was perfectly cast.
so happy
Richard Armitage and Amelia Fox,
Yeah.
and also the ghastly voice of Jarvis.
Yes.
But it was beautiful. And I think this would make an amazing adapted and onto TV. Two series, The Party and this.
Yeah.
Who would you like to cast?
Well, thank you, first of all. I could not believe it when we got the cast that we did for the audiobook. They are exceptional. And you're right, Richard Armitage, incredible Martin, Amelia Fox, incredible Serena. Then there's Oliver Chris, who some of you might know from Rivals, the TV adaptation. He plays the nauseating daytime TV host whose wife has an affair with Danny Dyer. He's Richard Tate. And then Bella McLean, who was also in Rivals as Taggy, is Cosima. So it's just like, and Genevieve Gaunt, who's got the most beautiful voice, is Fliss. So I could not have asked for a better cast. So I'm thrilled that you listened to it. When I write, because I'm very influenced by film and reality TV, I think I do write very visually. So I sort of always imagine scenes. So I would love it to be adapted for TV. Now, The Party is being adapted for TV. I know, I'm so excited I can actually say that now. I can say it because it's genuinely happening, and I went to a read-through last week, 2 weeks ago, and they're filming already. They started filming last week. So I know who's playing Martin in that, and I can't tell you, and it's driving It's awful. I can tell you that he has been a guest on the podcast before. And I will be able to tell you once ITV basically send out their press release. But that's happening, so now I can't visualise anyone else. But when I was writing The Party, I was thinking for Martin of sort of someone like Freddie Fox. Do you know, who's sort of ethereal and shape-shifting and high cheekbones and like all of that, and can kind of be chameleon-like. And I also was thinking of Dominic West, a Dominic West type of Ben. But I'm afraid to say, with all due respect to Dominic West, that he's aged out of playing that role there. But someone like a Matthew Good would be a great Ben. And then with Serena, because Amelia Fox did such a good job, I think Amelia Fox or Rosamund Pike would be brilliant. Oh, wouldn't she be good? Richard Take. Who do we think for Richard Take? Actually, I don't have a potted answer. I don't have a quick answer.
I think of him as quite a wiry sort of figure.
Yeah.
I don't think of him as like a Rufus Jones type, more of a wiry.
I agree with you. I think of him as Oliver Chris, which is unhelpful, but that's because he did the audiobooks so brilliantly. And then Cosima. Who am I thinking of? I'm thinking of this American actress called Caitlin someone. She was in Booksmart, the Olivia Wilde movie.
Oh,
she'd be a good Cosima. And then, sorry, I've really taken this and run with it. Ben's like, who do you think, Claire?
Oh, hang on.
Do you have any faves?
Well, you had a good. We're in our own book club together, so we've been discussing it.
I love it.
Around Jones and Dr. Foster, whoever, I think his name's...
Bertie Cavell.
Yes, he'd be brilliant.
Yes, he'd be
very good.
He just played Tony Blair in something, hasn't he?
Yes, Serena Jones would be great.
Yes. Tom Hollander.
To be
a Jarvis.
Jarvis.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
yeah.
when I was writing The Party, I was thinking of Philip Seymour Hoffman for Andrew Jarvis, but sadly, great. I mean, but someone like that.
Do you want to just give the producers a shout and just tell them we've got it all
We've
covered?
got it all sorted.
It's all fine.
I will do.
It's being recorded.
And just one more thing. How was John Bon Jovi?
Oh, he was great. Okay, so John Bon Jovi came on How to Fail last week, and as someone who was born, I'm like a Gen Xer, elder millennial. So for someone like me to meet John Bon Jovi, I remember listening to Living on a Prayer when I was 12 years old and feeling such infectious freedom in my bones. He was amazing. He turned up a half hour early, incredibly punctual, like almost military in his approach. Doesn't suffer fools gladly, and kind of put me through my paces at the beginning. So I was saying to Jamie that there was this classic exchange where I said, was it true that you were 19 when you wrote Runaway and you wrote the lyrics at a bus station? She's like, no. I was like, oh. No, I wasn't 19. I was probably like 20, about to turn 20. I was like, so sorry, you were 19 and a half. And he was like, yes. Anyway, after that, I think he realised that I'd done my research, and we had an amazing conversation, and he revealed stuff that he's never spoken about before, and he's like super charismatic, really handsome in person, and then just great at the end, like he noticed everything. He's got such attention to detail. He noticed that the studio clock had not been put back an hour because of daylight savings. So I was like, wow, I didn't even notice that. So he was great, gave me a hug, and I haven't washed myself since.
Well, as with all great book events, we finish on a John Bon Jovi anecdote. So normally at this stage I'd say to go and buy a copy of one of us, but you all have, which is why you're here in the first place. So there's now going to be book signing out there, but if we could all just join me in thanking Elizabeth once again for her visit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.